look at this footage from Fox News' Bill Malugin of a night in El Paso, Texas last week. Now, Democrats who oppose Title 42 have ironically decided that we are no longer in a pandemic. Unless, of course, you're a lawyer with student loans, in which case the pandemic era moratorium on your loans has been extended until June of 2023. The truth is we aren't in a pandemic anymore, but given the Biden administration's lax attitude toward the southern border, Title 42 has been effectively the only means of border control currently in operation. And that policy is now set to lapse after an appeals court denied a GOP effort to keep it in place. Border Patrol agents, border towns, and southern states are bracing for the huge influx of migrants in already taxed systems. El Paso has declared a state of emergency, but they aren't the only ones. Governors of southern states have taken to busing migrants to sanctuary cities, liberal bastions that like to brag about their openness to immigrants. And those cities' authorities have been less than pleased about being asked to put their money where their mouths are. New York City Mayor Eric Adams, for example, released a panicked statement on Sunday about the influx of 1,000 migrants a day that he is expecting to arrive in New York once Title 42 expires. Quote, "Our shelter system is full and we are nearly out of money, staff, and space," Mayor Adams said in his statement. Truth be told, if corrective measures are not taken soon, says Adams, we may very well be forced to cut or curtail programs New Yorkers rely on, and the pathway to house thousands more is uncertain. These are not choices we want to make, but they may become necessary, says Adams, and I refuse to be forced to choose new arrivals over current New Yorkers. Unfortunately, that choice has already been made and not in favor of New Yorkers. The Independent Budget Office projected that the city will spend $600 million a year to provide shelter, education, healthcare, and legal aid to the asylum seekers who have already made their way to New York. Meanwhile, New York City's public housing residents have a backlog of repairs to the tune of billions of dollars, as Daniel Barber, who represents New York City Housing Authority's 339,000 tenants, aptly put it in an interview with the New York Post. The city is going to put forth a ton of money for these people who aren't even citizens, but they forgot about the people who live in public housing right here, says Barber. How is it fair to them to spend their hard-earned taxpayer dollars on illegal immigrants? How is it fair to the working-class Americans struggling to get by? How is it fair to the 40,000 homeless veterans across the nation? How is it fair to legal immigrants or those patiently applying for asylum who can't access our southern border? How is it fair to the families of people dying of fentanyl overdoses from drugs brought in by cartels who have become experts at trafficking humans to distract from their drug trafficking? It's not just in New York. The choice to prioritize economic migrants over American citizens has been made over and over by the Biden administration. In removing every one of Trump's immigration policies, Biden has signaled to eager migrants that the door is open and they will be welcomed with open arms if they cross illegally into the U.S. And it is Americans, American taxpayers, Americans in need of services, American children who rely on public schools, and American workers who rely on American health care, who have been asked to pay for the pieties of this administration without getting a say in it. Immigration advocates argue that Title 42 unfairly denied migrants the opportunity to seek asylum. But the reporting has found repeatedly that the majority of the migrants illegally crossing the border are economic migrants and their families who don't have a legitimate asylum claim. In fact, it's something Nancy Pelosi herself admitted in her infamous comments about how we need these illegal migrants to, quote, pick crops. Ironically, after calling Trump's border policies cruel and inhumane, President Biden now seems poised to start copying Trump. Two proposals in particular seem to be coming straight out of the Trump playbook on immigration, Axios reports. The Biden administration is considering imposing a version of Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, which would bar single adults who cross illegally who have not first applied for asylum in countries they crossed through to enter the U.S. And the administration is considering ramping up criminal prosecutions for illegal border crossing. Recall that then candidate Biden raised his hand when asked during a Democratic primary debate whether he would decriminalize illegal border crossing. The administration is also considering raising the cap on a recently successful program, which sends up to 24,000 Venezuelans specifically back to Mexico if they attempt to cross illegally. The program radically reduced the number of Venezuelans attempting to cross, though increasing the cap will rely on Mexico's cooperation. It's not just ironic that President Biden won an election in part by parading his virtue on immigration and portraying his opponent as unbelievably cruel, only to now embrace his opponent's tactics in the face of a crisis of Biden's own making. Democrats cast Trump's base, too, as cruel and hateful bigots for thinking that this country should have a secure border. They called them racist for thinking American citizens should come first. They called them white people obsessed with losing status to, quote, people of color, for wanting a secure border. Leftist journalists and academics and politicians went to great lengths to smear their fellow Americans as hateful, only to have it made clear what their privilege had protected them from having to acknowledge. After all, it is not morality, but privilege that protects you from having to worry about an immigrant taking your job. It's not virtue, but economic security that grants you the ability to put signs in your window saying, immigrants are welcome here. Though, of course, we saw how far those signs got the migrants flown to Martha's Vineyard. You're not a better person than the working class Americans who vote on immigration. You're just richer. But it seems that now even some on the left are finding their voices and able to admit the truth. The southern border is a mess. You can't have a country without a border. It's not cruel to believe this. It is unbelievably cruel not to. Your fellow Americans who are struggling shouldn't have to pay for your pieties. Why don't you learn to spare a kind word for them from your position of immense privilege?